I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1 podcast.
What's up, everyone? It is Ricci here from the F1 podcast. Happy Monday, September 16. Recording this a few days after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where Oscar Piastri wins his second race of the season, and we have a new leader in the Constructors Championship. I'm here with my co-host, Erica Hollingsworth. Erica, how are you doing? You must be a little giddy after this weekend.
I can't lie. I'm very happy. We are now sitting 20 points ahead of Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship over at McLaren. And I think if you were to ask me a couple months ago if I thought this was possible, I would have told you you were off your rocker. So feeling pretty good on this Monday, I gotta say.
Do a barrel roll.
First and fourth in Baku was enough to lift McLaren on top of the Constructor Championships for the first time since the 2014 Australian Grand Prix, and it comes just 21 months after they set bottom of the standings after one race in Bahrain. And Erica, I don't know if you remember that night day. We were at Trinity Common. You and I both looked at each other and said, "Oh shit, this is going to be the season to forget."
Between the absurd number of pit stops, cars not working at all. I was a mess. Ferrari didn't have a great start to that either. It's crazy that we're now sitting in a place where McLaren's taking the victory. Ferrari is in great stance with a couple of wins under their belt this season, a lot of podiums with Charles coming P2 this week. I feel like it's really turned around, honestly. This is a very different place than I think we expected to be. And I know, at least on my side, thought it would be a longer climb for sure.
Yeah, and I think what was really interesting, we can get right into the race weekend, but despite that, very different, I guess, settings this weekend compared to like 2023 and 2022, it still seemed like a lot of people struggled with Baku. It is a very fast circuit. I don't know if you had a chance to watch practice, but we have Leclerc crash yet again. Lance struggling with his car. You had Franco Colapinto, if I pronounce his name. He crashed as well. You had Oliver Behrman crash in FP3. And for those that don't remember, we thought that Kevin Magnussen was out, and that means they're only racing one driver. However, we were wrong, and Ollie Behrman got his shot and got some points while he was at it. But what really stood out for you? Oh, and I forgot to mention FP3, Perez and Carlos Sainz potentially crashing, foreshadowing. But yeah, I guess what stood out to you any of the practice sessions?
Yeah, I'd say the practice sessions, it was very interesting. I know this is a circuit that has challenged a lot of the drivers in the past. And despite the fact that a lot of these guys have been here a few times now in, this hybrid era, we're still seeing a level of unpredictability that I don't think we've had in the past. Um, in the sense that, you usually expect the more seasoned guys who have been in the sim a little longer, they've been on the track more to really hold it down. And, age is not an indicator of how well you're going to do on this circuit at all. And quite frankly, after some of the crashes with some of our more rookie drivers stepping in partway through the season, I didn't have high hopes coming out of the practice session. So those were definitely a few of the things that stood out to me. So very interesting to see, certain themes like that continued and other ones were very different when we actually got into qualifying and race day.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because even we talk about the experienced drivers and like even for Norris, who I mean, McLaren was kind of a watch this weekend. Is like, how are they going to respond after what happened at the in Monza the previous week before? But I mean, didn't start off as well, with a Q1 exit for Lando Norris. I guess like I think that was not his ideal start going into Saturday, but we saw Leclerc for the fourth year in a row, I believe, capture pole position. But unfortunately, we can talk about Sunday's race where he was not able to, secure that win. But I mean, that's not really a great start to the weekend for McLaren.
No, qualifying as a whole was a bit of a gong show, for lack of a better term. I think many of us were surprised to see it play out the way we did. I'm just going back here and what was it? Like we saw there was like the unfortunate yellow flagging where some folks where they were on the lap didn't slow down, so they were able to get one last time in Q1. Unfortunately for Lando's team, they saw the yellow flag, called him in, which meant that he was eliminated in Q1, which is just really crummy timing because you obviously don't want to risk getting a penalty or anything by not respecting the race director's call, but at the same time, that kind of shot yourself in the foot. And we also saw Max, I think, a few times. People were concerned he wasn't going to move on to Q2 or Q1, really. He was really kind of leaving it to the last minute there. I think at the end of Q1, Albon finished in P2, and I don't think anyone expected that out of the Williams. We've seen some good stuff out of the car recently, but not a P2 showing on a circuit like Baku. It was just very strange to see where everyone ended up in that grid formulation there.
Well, yeah, to have both the Williams, qualify P9 and P10, was quite something. Was quite something to see. I mean, and you also had a number of instances where you had, Zhou was required to start from the back of the grid for exceeding his quota of power unit elements. You had Lewis Hamilton qualified 7th, but then he was required to start the race from the pit lane. Esteban Ocon qualified 19, but then he had to start from the pit lane. And then you had that disqualification, I believe it was Pierre Gasly,
yep.
For his exceeded. It's like, so we talk about this moment where throughout the season is like when teams are struggling, like, you have these moments of greatness from others. And, you had Ollie Behrman, he looked really good, and, P11 for his time in a Haas. And then you had both the Williams, and then you had Leclerc, who was able just to eke out Oscar at the end. But I think overall it was kind of a chaotic, how are we going to say, chaotic qualifying. And then we talk about recovery drives, but you had Sergio Perez even qualify P4, promising enough. And he looked pretty well until, I guess, the last couple of laps on Sunday. But should we just jump right into Sunday? I guess, what were some of your takes from the race?
Oh my gosh, there was so much to talk about on Sunday, really. Like, it's hard to narrow it down to a couple of things, but first and foremost, it was exciting to see a start that had a little bit more going for it beyond the first turn. I think the last while, because we've seen, Lando at the front of the grid, and unfortunately, he's got a bit of a reputation of not holding on to his position. I was kind of curious. I was like, is Oscar going to do the same thing? Is this now like the P1 curse and Charles is going to give it up? But no, very exciting. I mean, you're going into that 90-degree turn off the get-go, and I always just kind of have to hold my breath because I'm so terrified. We've seen, I don't know how many accidents, crashes, collisions, near outs at that corner before. But we kind of just got off to the races immediately. I mean, there was pressure from everyone all over the grid, immediately overtakes, which we're not used to seeing on some of the modern day street circuits because they're too narrow for these cars. And it just made for a very fun and entertaining Sunday, which whether you were looking at the front of the grid, the middle of the pack, or at the back, there was lots going on, lots of movement and lots of fun. So overall, I'd say it was probably one of, if not the most enjoyable race of the season to date.
Would you say this was probably Oscar Piastri's best race in a Formula One car? I would argue for sure, from taking that lap 20, overtake on Leclerc, and honestly defending like his life depended on it. I don't know if you heard him on the radio. He says that was the most stressful day of my life. And he didn't even realize what happened behind him. But I guess, what was your take on that?
No, I'd agree. He's got 2 other wins under his belt. The first one kind of being a gimme from the team. The second one definitely earned, even though it was overtaking his teammate. But once he overtook Lando, he was kind of off to the races and it was a guaranteed dub for him, right? So now to have him really have to fight for it, we got to see, people have said this guy is at the caliber of being a world driving championship at one point. He's got a fantastic mentor in Mark Webber being his manager, and they can see that coming about in only his second season. But this was the first time I think anyone beyond kind of the little McLaren cult or like the super in-depth analytics people will begin to believe and see that as well. because he was chasing down Leclerc the whole time. He was holding on for dear life to make sure that he didn't give up that lead afterward. And it was a little bit of a, you know, that inside pass could have gone very different. Like that could have just been straight into the wall, quite frankly. I think it really was a testament to his skill and showing that not only does McLaren have a really good car, but when you've got people driving it with a lot of skill behind it, as you know, we know Lando and Oscar are talented. All these guys are talented, but we really saw it come through this week as Lando moved through the grid, and then Oscar obviously was doing his thing, battling at the front.
I forgot to mention this earlier in the episode, but they did interview Oscar prior to the weekend in Azerbaijan, and he was pretty indicated that he will be a team player. And if there's that chance for Lando to help get some more points, put some more pressure on Max, he'd be willing to do that. So that was another thing that I wanted to see what would happen this weekend. But even Lando, despite not having the greatest of qualifyings, he got his way up to the grid. He was a team player where he needed to do, and he also hi Ollie, good to see you. He also sorry, he also played team player and held up Sergio Perez at parts of the race, and just Oscar Piastri's 91 points away from Verstappen, but this kind of form is not only key to McLaren winning the first Constructors Championship for more than 2 decades, but for him being like, I am a quality driver and I should be considered going forward. Just battle Lando at times if needed.
Yeah, and I mean, we all kind of laughed when Zach Brown was saying we've got 2 number 1 drivers. I still have to laugh at it because ultimately it is team orders, but this is a testament. You've got 2 guys who, with the right strategy in this car, could take it all the way, right? So very exciting to see what's coming out of the McLaren garage lately. And yeah, it's just, I mean, I hate to say that it's because there's just this entire collapse over at Red Bull, but you know what? I'm gonna benefit from it where I can. So I'll take it.
Well, yeah, and I think let's talk about like the defending drivers and constructors champs. I mean, it was a poor. I think one light was the promising qualifying from Perez, because we did talk about like as this gets more competitive in the drivers' championship, Red Bull really needs both drivers to really get points to stop McLaren. And while I think Perez showed so much promise this weekend. Like, oh my gosh, he might actually do it. He might get like on a podium for the first time since earlier in the season. Someone's gonna have to check on that for me. But then collision.
I know. So
sorry. Yeah, first since I guess Miami.
yeah, exactly. I was digging into it earlier, and so, Sainz and Checo are duking it out for this 3rd place position. Would have been Checo's first podium since China,
Okay,
and would
nice.
have been the first time he finished P4 since Miami, which was the race after. So that was a long time ago in this season. So much has happened since then. And it was also, I think, for a lot of folks, his performance has come under question and under fire so much. Like, even I was dragging on the guy, like, Max is doing so well. What the heck is up with this guy? Why isn't, you maybe don't expect him to be right behind Max all the time with these other competitive cars, but you expect a little bit more parity between the two. And I know we've talked about how Checo was complaining about the car for the long time, but even this week, I was reading through like Autosport and a few other magazines and online forums and stuff, but Horner was coming to say that part of the struggles with the car, and it is stuff that Checo was complaining about for a long time, but they just ignored because Max was still doing so well, so they didn't actually think it was that big of an issue with a car. They've now done a technical analysis. This goes back to an upgrade they made to the underbody in Barcelona 2023. That's where they've traced this back to, but Max was still doing so well that they ignored it. So that was what Horner was saying. And then Helmut Marko was also saying that they took a wrong turn in development of the car in Imola this year. They also brought some other upgrades to it, which haven't was building upon what they had done in the past. That was also built on like a faulty set of data and everything because Max was doing so well. So it's kind of compounding problems with the car over there. And I mean, like, woof, talk about a tall order. You've got all kinds of like sporting directors leaving and Nui leaving, and they're all going to these other teams. So you also don't have the personnel you're used to having there fix it. And you'll appreciate this because the last time a constructor had something similar was when Schumacher was racing at Ferrari.
Hmm,
So it
interesting.
turns out that, they went through this whole dominant period. The car completely dropped off. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And it was because the sheer amount of talent that Schumacher had was making up for faults in the car. But eventually the car just got to a place where they couldn't do anything with it anymore. So Red Bull, I'm going to call it the Ferrari fallacy when it comes to car design. And seems like Red Bull's sort of fallen into that trap as well.
I think in the end that like Formula One is a team sport and you need to invest in both your drivers. And yet, while I get it that Max Verstappen is the better driver, however, in this instance here, if Checo starts complaining about it, they're like, okay, whatever. And then when Max starts complaining, they're like, okay, maybe there is some sort of problem with the car. Maybe we should have listened to our second driver. Um, I don't know what, I guess maybe it was a little bit of like Checo was, fighting. He was excited. Maybe, that I don't know how to take the crash. According to, I think, what we post on Instagram, a majority of our followers thought that Checo was at fault. I don't know how you would see it, but I mean, I'm happy that both of them are not hurt, but like it was obviously, yeah. And, it would have been nice seeing Oscar to go down the finish line, like at fast speed, especially at a track like Baku instead of under the virtual safety car. But I mean, I think we blame Checo here? I would probably assume so.
Yeah, the FIA is kind of pointing fingers at both of them right now, though, both Sainz and Checo. And I mean, I can see both sides of it. Carlos was ahead coming out of the corner, and it's him not doing a full turn, but just trying to regain and follow the racing line through the rest of the track. So he does kind of have the right of way to take the spot, and Checo should have made space for him. But at the same time, if Carlos were using his side mirrors, he would have seen that Checo was there and wouldn't necessarily like may have waited until he was a little further ahead before starting to come back to take over the racing line. So both of them, I believe, have got a slap on the hand with an investigation open. And it really is truly unfortunate because we want the wheel-to-wheel racing. We're excited when we get it, and that's what it was. You can't get much more wheel-to-wheel than that. But I think there's going to be a lot of debate over who is definitively at fault, if either of them are definitively at fault. And it's going to be a sticking point, I think, for a few races to come.
Well, ironically, because George Russell, I don't know if you watched before, he
I know
indicated
they asked what he would need for a podium, and he said he'd need the four drivers in front to crash.
coincidence? I think not. I don't know. We'll see how it is. Some other most notable moments of this weekend. We saw Fernando Alonso score some much needed points, getting P6 as well. Williams, as we talked about earlier, amazing drives by Alex Albon and Franco Colapinto. Getting those much needed points in the constructors. Oliver Behrman, I mean, I'm so excited to see what he will do next year. I mean, getting his points, stepping into a car that like he's going to have to get used to for next year, but able to get that much needed point for the constructors. Yeah, no, it was a pretty exciting down the line. And we had some notable DNFs as well with, I think it was brake issues with Lance Stroll, collision damage for Yuki Tsunoda, sorry, and as well. I think that's pretty much it, but I don't know. It's gonna look bad for Red Bull, to be honest with you. I envision that they're not gonna do really well in Singapore. They have a history of not doing well there, so I think I don't know where this recovery is gonna be for them. I think it has to be the week of the race after, but I don't know. It's not looking good for them right now.
A position to come back. I think they've already talked about how the next year or so, even the 2025 season, will be rough because it'll be trying to undo a lot of what's been done. And at that point, are you just focusing on the 2026 car? Like, what is it that you aim to do? So we'll see a lot coming. Some other more exciting things about this weekend. Ollie Behrman is officially the first ever F1 driver to race for two different teams in the same season,
Oh, really?
despite the fact that he was just subbing for people, which is exciting. And there's quite a few folks who are now chanting. I believe we have one seat left open for the 2025 season, and folks are really hoping that Colapinto will get it because he's showing that, there was this car that was doing nothing. Sorry, Logan Sargent, but we're realizing the problem was you and not the car. And yeah, to be able to score points and he's charismatic in his interviews, he's very well polished. People are really enjoying having him around right now. So they're hoping that they get to see more of him and that this isn't, a Liam Lawson situation where we get him for a few races, we really like him, and then there's no space for him in the following season. So excited to see what happens for the Argentinian. I mean, he and Ollie Behrman were like fangirling over getting to race alongside Lewis this week. Lewis gave them both shout outs. Like, that was so fun. These guys are like young, hungry, and talented. That's what we need. So I'm very excited for these young guys coming up the rising through the ranks as well, because they're doing good stuff in cars that we don't expect a lot from. And so I think it's a testament that they're young, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're being promoted ahead of their time, and we're going to see good things from them as they move further into the sport in the years to come.
Well, especially with Ollie now he converting points in both those races. Like, he's 2 for 2. Even with the car crash for Franco, like able to crash in an FP1 and then able to get some points on Sunday. So just like no matter what he was laser focused on what was needed for this weekend. Yeah, two spots still remain. Stake still has their second position need to be filled, and then Visa Cash App Red Bull F1 team. Say that 3 times. There's still need to figure out who's going to be in that second seat alongside Yuki Tsunoda. So yeah, time will tell. I mean, if Franco keeps driving like this will definitely be really good. Anything else kind of this weekend that really stood out for you? I think we covered most of it.
I'd say so, yeah.
And then just a couple other things, non-F1 related. As everyone was aware, we went to the Honda Indy in Toronto. Alex Palou of Chip Ganassi Racing won his 3rd IndyCar season title, winning it this year. Held off a late surge by Colton Herta and Scott McLaughlin and Will Power. So just wanted to congratulate Alex, and we're looking forward to seeing him race again in Toronto next year. So we're looking forward to attending that. Also, we are 10 followers away from 1,100 followers on Instagram.
Gosh.
So we're almost there. We got 10 more. Tell your friends, tell your aunts, uncles, just whatever, talk at your Christmas dinner in a couple of months. Try to get some followers
Christmas
out of
dinner.
us.
We got Thanksgiving before then, man.
Thanksgiving.
Bring it up at Thanksgiving dinner. Come on.
I don't know about you. I'm already seeing the Halloween. I'm already seeing
I know at Michael's, they've already got the Christmas decorations coming up, and it was August last time I went. So I'm having a bit of a crisis of the seasons, but fortunately, we've got the rest of the F1 season, before we get into the ho-ho-hos and the ha-ha-has of the end of year holiday season. I'm sorry, that was a bad joke, but I thought it was funny, so I said it.
You lose.
It's fine. Also, I just wanted to give a shout out to Allison and Lynette. For those that don't know, they were the I Give an F1 podcast. They just do a new rebrand, the Undercut Society of Formula One podcast. Congratulations, ladies. We're looking forward to seeing what the new content that you'll be bringing with this channel. And we can't wait to be on the next episode, or we'll have you on our episode. But I think that is this week's for this. That is it for this week's episode of the F1 podcast, season 4, episode 29. I'm Ricci. That's Erica. Andrew couldn't be here for this week's episode, but don't worry. You saw his funny laugh of Adrian Newey. Don't worry, that's going to be a soundbite going forward. So thank you for tuning into this week's episode, and we will see you next week as we will preview the Singapore Grand Prix. Thanks, everyone.